A rich gay man married a homeless man, only to discover he was an heir. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more emotional and dramatic stories like this one. He had everything: money, success, a life surrounded by luxury. But one simple decision changed everything. When he helped a homeless man being beaten on the street, he never imagined that act of kindness would lead to an unexpected marriage. What seemed like just a moment of compassion turned into a passionate, intense romance, filled with secrets. But nothing could prepare him for the truth he was about to uncover. His husband was not just a homeless man. He was the heir to an unimaginable fortune. And now, everything was about to change. Los Angeles was a city of extremes, wealth and poverty, glamour and despair. I had always been aware of it, but never had it hit me so hard as that night. I had just left an upscale restaurant in West Hollywood, the kind of place where valet drivers opened your door with a smile and the wine cost more than most people's rent. My world was polished, structured, and safe. But in the span of a few seconds, everything shifted. I saw him. He was curled up against a brick wall, barely visible under the dim streetlights. His body was thin, wrapped in layers of ragged clothing that had once been something else, before life had worn them down. But it wasn't his appearance that made me stop. It was the two men standing over him, laughing, mocking him. Then one of them kicked him, a hard, cruel kick. Something inside me snapped. "Hey!" My voice was louder than I intended, cutting through the noise of the city. The two men turned, both of them smirking like I had just interrupted their fun. One of them shrugged. "Mind your business, man." I stepped closer. "My business is stopping you from acting like a couple of animals." The other guy scoffed, crossing his arms. "Why do you care? He's just some homeless loser." That word just made my blood boil. I reached into my wallet, pulled out a stack of $100 bills, and threw it on the ground between us. "There," I said coldly. "Take it and leave." Their eyes widened before they laughed and scrambled to grab the cash, shoving it into their pockets before disappearing down the street. I turned to the man still curled up on the sidewalk. He hadn't moved. I crouched beside him, my voice softer now. "Are you okay?" Nothing. His hands were shaking slightly, his fingers curled against the concrete as if he were bracing for another blow. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said. Then he looked at me, and everything changed. His eyes, deep, piercing blue, framed by dark lashes, locked onto mine. They didn't belong to someone forgotten by the world. There was intelligence there. Pride, fire. For a second, I couldn't speak. Then he blinked, his expression unreadable. "Why did you do that?" His voice was rough, hoarse, like he hadn't spoken in days. I hesitated. "Because it was the right thing to do." He huffed out a bitter laugh. "Rich boy playing hero?" I frowned. "That's not what this is." His gaze flicked to my suit, my expensive watch, my polished shoes. "Right." I ignored the sarcasm. "What's your name?" Silence. I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Listen, you don't have to trust me, but you shouldn't stay out here. It's dangerous." He let out a hollow chuckle. "No kidding." I glanced down the street. It was past midnight. The air was cooling, but I knew that in just a few hours the California sun would turn the pavement into an oven. "Let me help you," I said. "Just for tonight." His jaw tightened. "Why?" Because I couldn't just walk away. Because there was something in his eyes that told me he wasn't meant to be here. But I didn't say that. Instead, I told him the only thing that mattered. Because I can. He stared at me for a long time. Then, finally, He exhaled and nodded. And that was the moment everything changed. He sat in the passenger seat of my car, silent but tense, as if he was ready to jump out at any second. The interior of my sleek black Mercedes was probably the most expensive thing he had touched in years, and I could feel the unease radiating off him. I didn't even know his name yet. He hadn't spoken much since we left the street. Not a single thank you. Not a single question about where we were going. Just occasional glances at me, as if trying to figure out my angle. I let him have the silence. I wasn't doing this for gratitude. But I won't lie. His presence unsettled me in a way I didn't expect. Something about him was different. When I pulled into the underground parking of my condo, I noticed the way his posture stiffened. He wasn't used to this. The clean space, the security guards at the entrance, the gleaming elevator doors that only led to homes worth millions. "Where are we?" he finally asked, his voice guarded. "My place." I turned off the engine. He scoffed. "You take a lot of strays home?" I sighed, unbuckling my seatbelt. "Do you always bite the hand that feeds you?" He turned his sharp blue eyes on me, studying me like I was a puzzle he didn't want to solve. Then, after a long beat, he said, "I don't need charity." I met his gaze, steady and firm. "Then think of it as a loan." Something flickered across his expression, but he didn't argue. Instead, he reached for the door handle and stepped out. A small victory. I led him through the private elevator, the hum of the city fading as the doors slid shut. He stood next to me, arms crossed, keeping his distance. I still didn't know his name. "Are you planning to tell me who you are?" I asked casually. He didn't look at me. "Why does it matter?" I exhaled, shaking my head. "Fine. Stay a mystery." The elevator doors opened to my penthouse, a wide, open space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Everything was sleek, modern, designed to impress. I was used to it. But when he stepped inside, he froze. His eyes swept over the plush leather furniture, the marble floors, the glass walls that made it feel like we were floating above Los Angeles. For a split second, I saw something in his face. Recognition? Shock? But it vanished just as quickly. He shoved his hands into his tattered hoodie pockets, his expression unreadable again. "I'll get you some clothes and a shower," I said. "You need it." He gave me a look. "You don't have to remind me." I left him standing there as I went to grab something from my closet. When I returned, he was by the window, staring down at the streets below. I held out the clothes, a simple black t-shirt and sweatpants. "Here." He hesitated, then took them. His fingers brushed mine, rough and calloused, a contrast to my own. Something about that brief touch sent an unexpected shiver up my spine. He cleared his throat. "Where's the shower?" I pointed toward the hallway. "First door on the right." He disappeared inside without another word. I exhaled, rubbing a hand over my face. What the hell was I doing? I had picked up a complete stranger off the streets, brought him into my home. I didn't know anything about him, but somehow I felt like this moment, this night, was going to change my life. I just didn't know how yet. The sound of running water filled the penthouse, but my mind was stuck elsewhere. I had spent years building a life of control, structured, precise, predictable. I ran a multi-million-dollar business, made calculated decisions, never acted impulsively. And yet, here I was, with a homeless man in my shower. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, stepping toward the massive floor-to-ceiling window. The city stretched out before me, glowing, alive, full of stories that no one ever really saw. Tonight, I had stepped into one of those stories, and for the first time in years, I had no idea where it was going. The bathroom door clicked open behind me. I turned and froze. He stood there in the fresh clothes I had given him, but he didn't look like the man I had met on the street. The hoodie and oversized rags were gone, replaced by a simple black t-shirt and joggers that actually fit his frame. And what a frame it was. Beneath the layers of dirt and exhaustion, he was striking. Sharp cheekbones, jawline cut like it belonged on a magazine cover, tousled dark hair damp from the shower. But it was his posture that caught me off guard. He didn't slouch anymore. He stood tall, straight, confident, like someone who had once known exactly who he was. But something had taken that from him. He rubbed the back of his neck. Haven't had a shower like that in a long time. I set my glass down, watching him carefully. Yeah? He glanced around the penthouse, his blue eyes sharp, observant. This place... His fingers grazed the edge of the marble countertop. It's expensive. I crossed my arms. You sound like you know luxury. For a brief second, I saw something flicker in his expression, like he had slipped. Then he shrugged, leaning against the counter. You watch enough rich people walk past you, you start to recognize things. A smooth response, but not smooth enough. I took a slow sip of whiskey. You never told me your name. He hesitated. Then, finally, Nathan. Nathan. It suited him. I stepped closer. Nathan, do you have family, friends, anyone looking for you? He let out a short, bitter laugh. If I did, I wouldn't be on the streets. But something felt off. He was too aware of his surroundings, too at ease in this space, despite claiming to have nothing. And that moment earlier, that flicker of recognition when he first saw the penthouse. He wasn't just some guy who had fallen on hard times. He was hiding something, and I was going to find out what. Nathan had settled into my penthouse for the night, but something about him lingered in my mind like an unsolved equation. I sat in the living room, watching the city flicker outside the glass walls, my whiskey swirling in my hand. Nathan was on the couch, flipping absently through the channels on the massive flat-screen TV. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes, those sharp, calculating blue eyes, were still guarded. He was watching me as much as I was watching him. You've been quiet, I said finally. Nathan smirked, his fingers resting lightly on the remote. Didn't realize conversation was part of the deal. I chuckled. You're in my home, wearing my clothes, eating my food. I think I deserve a little insight into who I just rescued off the streets. He arched a brow. Rescue? That's a bit dramatic. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. Is it? Because I remember pulling you out of the dirt while two assholes were kicking you like trash. Nathan's smirk faltered. He looked down, his jaw tightening. Then, after a long pause, he sighed and leaned back against the couch. I didn't always live like this, he admitted. I stayed quiet, letting him continue. Nathan exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. I had a life, a real one, a home, an education, and then things fell apart. I studied him, every word measured, carefully spoken. Things? He let out a dry laugh. That's a nice way to put it. Silence stretched between us. I could feel the weight of whatever he wasn't saying pressing against the air. Then, just when I thought he wouldn't say anything else, he muttered, I used to be someone. I frowned. What does that mean? Nathan's hands tightened into fists. He shook his head. It doesn't matter. Not anymore. But it did. It mattered because I had seen the way he looked at this place, the way his body had adjusted so easily to luxury. Nathan wasn't just someone who had fallen on hard times. He had known wealth before, and for some reason, he had lost it. I wanted to ask more, to press him for details, but before I could, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced down. A message from an unknown number. You don't know who he is, do you? My stomach twisted. I looked up at Nathan, but he was staring at the TV, seemingly unaware. The phone buzzed again. Be careful. Some people don't stay lost by accident. A chill ran down my spine. Who the hell was Nathan? The words on my phone screen felt like a cold knife against my skin. You don't know who he is, do you? Be careful. Some people don't stay lost by accident. I looked up from my phone, my pulse pounding. Nathan was still sitting on the couch, his gaze fixed on the TV. But he wasn't watching it. He was lost in thought. His fingers tapped against his knee, his jaw set tight like he was holding something back. I had been right all along. He wasn't just a homeless man. And now, someone out there wanted me to know it. I exhaled slowly, setting my phone down. I could confront him now, demand the truth. But something told me that if I pushed too hard, he'd shut down completely. Instead, I poured us both a drink. Whiskey? I offered. Nathan turned his head slightly, studying me. He hesitated for just a second. Then he nodded. Sure. I handed him the glass, watching as he took a sip. He held it like someone who had done this before. Not like someone who had been drinking out of plastic bottles and cracked cups on the street. Everything about him screamed out of place. I leaned back, swirling my own drink. I got a strange message just now. Nathan's grip on the glass tightened, but his face stayed carefully neutral. Yeah? Yeah. I met his eyes. It said, I don't know who you are. For the first time since we met, he flinched. A flicker of something. Fear? Guilt? Flashed through his gaze before he masked it with that infuriating smirk. Maybe you don't, he said smoothly, taking another sip of whiskey. I let out a quiet chuckle, shaking my head. You're a terrible liar, Nathan. He exhaled through his nose, staring down at the amber liquid in his glass. What do you want me to say? The truth. Nathan was silent for a long moment. Then, finally, he placed his drink down on the table and looked me dead in the eyes. My name is Nathaniel Pierce, he said, his voice low, steady. I felt my stomach drop. That name, I knew it. Nathaniel Pierce had disappeared 3 years ago. He wasn't just some nobody. He was the heir to one of the wealthiest families in California, and he had been declared legally dead. I set my drink down carefully. You're supposed to be dead. Nathan's lips curled into a humorless smile. Yeah, funny how that works. Everything I thought I knew had just shattered. I stared at him, my mind racing. Nathaniel Pierce, a name that had once been splashed across headlines, the heir to the Pierce family fortune, the golden boy of Los Angeles. And yet, here he was, sitting in my penthouse, dressed in my clothes, sipping whiskey like he hadn't spent the last 3 years buried in the streets. You're supposed to be dead, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Nathan leaned back against the couch, his expression unreadable. Guess someone forgot to tell me. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling sharply. This didn't make sense. He wasn't just a missing person. He had been erased. His family had held a funeral. His estate had been settled. Billions of dollars had been distributed. And now he was here, alive and homeless. Tell me the truth, Nathan. Why did you disappear? Nathan's jaw clenched. For the first time since I met him, he looked truly exhausted. I didn't disappear, he muttered. I was erased. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. He set his glass down carefully, his fingers gripping the edge of the table as if steadying himself. My family tried to kill me. Silence. The weight of his words crashed into me, settling deep in my chest. Why? I asked, my voice tight. Nathan let out a humorless chuckle. Because I made a mistake, a very expensive one. I didn't say anything, waiting for him to continue. He exhaled. My father, Richard Pierce, built an empire. He controlled everything, and he had plans for me. Plans I didn't want. He leaned forward, rubbing a hand over his face. I fell in love with someone my father didn't approve of. His words hit me like a truck. I had heard this story before. Nathaniel Pierce, the perfect heir, the businessman in the making, had disappeared shortly after rumors surfaced that he had been involved with a man. That man had vanished, too. My father didn't care about love, Nathan continued, his voice colder now. He cared about power, about control. When he found out I was in a relationship with someone he couldn't use as leverage, he decided I was a liability. I swallowed. So Nathan nodded. He staged an accident, a fake death, and when I survived, I realized I had two choices: fight him and lose, or disappear. My hands tightened into fists. This was beyond cruel. Nathan's family had destroyed him, forced him into a life where he had nothing, no name, no home, no future, but he had survived. And now, sitting across from me, he looked tired of running. I took a deep breath. So, what happens now? Nathan looked at me then, really looked at me. Something flickered in his gaze, something raw. I don't know, he admitted. I never thought I'd get this far. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then, before I could stop myself, I reached across the table and took his hand. His breath hitched. Then let's figure it out, I said. Nathan's fingers tightened around mine, and for the first time I saw hope in his eyes. Maybe this wasn't the end of his story. Maybe it was the beginning. What would you do if the world thought you were dead? If this story shocked you, hit that like button and subscribe for more intense, emotional stories. Let me know in the comments, should Nathan expose the truth or keep running?